What generation are you guys reaching at this point?
I was at 5 generations on 2 strands, 4 generations on 3 or 4 strands, and I've got a picture of it,
Yes.
multiple others.
Excellent.
But now I'm helping church leaders around the country go to 3 and 4 generations on multiple strands and
I love
beyond.
it. I'm excited to hang out with Brian Phipps. Brian is a fellow disciple maker in Kansas City. We have lots of mutual friends. We've been on a very similar journey. We are trying to crack the code for how to make disciples. Like, what are the methods that lead to both transformation and multiplication? Brian heard one of my podcasts recently where I'm trying to understand, how do we get so off mission? Like, why is it so confusing? And that resonated. And so he told me he's got an organization. It's called disciplesmade.com. I'm excited to get into what Brian's doing. But yeah, Brian, thanks for jumping on the podcast with me today.
Yeah, well, thanks for being so responsive. I
Yeah.
listen to a podcast that a board member sends me access to, and next day I'm on a call hanging out with you. That's pretty
Yes.
cool.
That's how I like to do it. I'm just like, let's just dive right in, figure out what God's doing here. So, Brian, give me the story, like your backstory. We live in a world that's saturated with, it's all about the church. It's all about, growing the church. You somehow have also discovered that discipleship is a neglected mission. So walk me through how that happened.
Sure. I mean, I love the church. Jesus loves the church, so I love the church. He died for the church. I don't have to do that, but there's been a whole lot of dying to self
Mm,
in it. And the biggest part of that came about 15 years into my 30-year ordained ministry stint,
mm,
where I had just led a huge, like a small group campaign. You know how you do a purpose driven life or something like that. We'd created one. I was at Westside Family Church here in Kansas City, 5,000 ish, weekend attendance church across the campuses. And we just added 100 new groups, 1,000 people to groups. I
wow.
thought it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And I'm on my way home from the first one of those meetings, and Jesus sends me the message pretty clearly that, and just himself through his presence in the car,
Mm,
that he'd brought me here for something else, that my ladder was against the wrong wall. I was helping
wow.
people get connected, but
Yeah.
I wasn't ensuring that they were being transformed. There was no measurement for transformation, there was no strategy for transformation. And that was the biggest die to self moment because I didn't know how to do apparently what he was asking me to do because I was pedaling as fast and hard and as smart as I knew how.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I'd love to go one layer deeper, because having a really successful small group strategy launch that penetrates, that's very difficult to do. And for so many pastors, when that happens, they're like, check, we are making disciples. Like, that's the
Yeah, that
definition
was
of it.
me. I had the
Okay.
shirt.
Me too. I did a stint as a discipleship pastor, and that meant get the small groups going, get the small
Yeah.
groups multiplying. Help me understand the difference between small group ministry and disciple making. How do you kind of divide that line? Why do you think the Lord was really pinpointing this difference for you?
Yeah, let me just start by saying I thought they were the same. I
Okay.
was convinced they were the same. I had inherited a model that said participation equals transformation, or the best we can get at it.
Okay.
And it was at that time Jesus said, "You need to dig further, because if you're not getting the right job done, then you're not doing it the right way. And if you're not doing it the right way, you need to do a different way. You can't just put little tweaks on that or a new label on it or better branding or something like that. It has to be fundamentally different. You know that saying, if you keep doing things the same way and expecting a different result,
Yes.
that's insanity. That was the big shift, is that he had just made it clear that I wasn't getting the results that he was looking for. People weren't fundamentally different. The big thing that bugged me was that such a small percentage of people owned a sense of participation in the Great Commission.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that got me. It's like,
Okay.
why do so few people care as much as I do about the Great Commission? What's special about me? What's different about me? What happened to me in my formation? And I just started digging back into all that. That was really the first thing, was just this obvious gap between kind of my commitment to faith and most everybody else that came to the churches I led.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really counterintuitive for often people in today's modern Western church culture is the really being kind of a little bit harder on the definition of discipleship when Jesus in the Great Commission said, "Go and make disciples." I have a simple criteria that I try to pass every definition of discipleship through, and that is, would the disciples who heard Jesus say the Great Commission, would they have recognized that as the definition? So, for example, when we say small groups are discipleship, would the disciples go, "Oh, of course, that's what he's talking about," you know? Like, that's what
Yeah.
that's like, was that what they just went through over the last 3 years? There seems to be a difference, and I think that, and I'd love for you to tease out a little bit more of the difference, because I think one of the things that's really difficult for people to understand is small group ministry originally was not a response to a passion for the Great Commission, like you just said. Small
For
group
sure.
ministry, for the vast majority of churches, came out of a specific point of pain, and that is that when you have a worship service, you have about 6 months before people will leave your worship service if they don't make a
Sure.
meaningful relational connection with somebody. And
Yeah.
so pastors discovered this stat, and the churches that figured out how to solve that problem, they closed what they called the back door, right? They were really concerned about people leaving out the back door. So, what's the best way to get people engaged in a relationship? Well, it's to create, small groups, oftentimes based on life stage, so that you meet people that are in your neighborhood or that are in your current life stage. You can go through a Bible study. It doesn't mean you're not growing, doesn't mean you're not learning, but it's important to understand that the goal of that ministry is often to sort of help contain the congregants in and cause them to root in a particular uh, church expression,
Yeah.
and it wasn't explicitly designed for disciple making. So, yeah, help me understand, well, how do you see the distinction?
Yeah, I mean, every bit of that is true. I mean, even like the primary consultants back in the day, and this also just to be, even more, painting the picture. This was also a response to when Sunday mornings went to more gathering, trying to reach seekers. The seeker
Yes.
movement is like, okay, we need to add a discipleship component, and that happens in smaller environments. The care component goes to small groups. So there was a lot of pain points that this was intended to address, but none of them necessarily discipleship. Unless, of course, your definition allows for the assumption, it's a false assumption, but if it allows for the assumption of participation equals maturity or transformation. And so, I mean, what's the difference? We talk about intentional disciple making environments. And so the elements of intentionality that are present in a disciple making experience that are not necessarily in small groups are a measurement of what formation actually looks like and a focus and accountability and spiritual habits that actually render all of those, those outcomes. So that you need to have a clear definition as to what it means to be a disciple. You need to have spiritual habits that render
Yes.
those outcomes, and you need to have the kind of accountability and support that makes you successful in community to do such things.
Yeah.
That's just a beginning to that answer.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting you're using the word, habits. I'm just finishing reading, there's a book called, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, and the author is going through the first 200 years of church history and their disciple making process, and he really highlights the construction of alternative habits, that the new believers were being trained in, that were extremely counter to their flesh, to what was normal in the kind of Roman pagan culture, and that this is what actually led to the evangelism explosion that happened in the second and third centuries. People just had a different quality of life because the
Yeah.
discipleship was so robust. It was so
Yeah.
targeted at these habits that were so strikingly different and attractive to people in their culture. And
Yeah.
we seem to have a little different strategy when it comes to evangelism. It doesn't seem to primarily be because of the incredible transformation of the disciples. It seems to really hinge on something else. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting word.
Yeah, the
I'd love for
relevance
you to,
of the content in the group or the
yes,
weekend message or whatever. Yeah, it's
yes,
all content dependent, which is very
yes.
centralized. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you had this small group ministry. It was taking off. You get this sort of insight from the Holy Spirit. What about the Great Commission, Brian? Like, let's do that. Tell me what happened next.
Well, I didn't know how to do whatever he was asking me to do, and so he said, "Shelve what you think you know. Don't throw it away. It's gonna come in handy, but, I need you to forget that you know anything, really, so that you can have a simplistic mind to come and just do what I ask you to do."
Hmm.
And, so listen, just wait,
Okay.
and when you hear what I invite you to do, do it without any hesitation, and then write down what works and share it with others, which is really a simple discovery Bible study
Yes.
process, except this is about kind of systems. And so the first thing he asked me to do was break up the group that I was leading 2 groups at a time, a men's group and a couples group, one at home with my wife. It's like, "I need you to let those folks know that come, the end of December, that those groups you will not be leading anymore. By the between September, this is September and December, you'll, uh, you'll invite people to lead, invite those leaders to have apprentices or co-leaders,
Hmm.
and you'll disciple those leaders and co-leaders starting in January for 12 months. And that will be their kind of on the job training, their support and whatnot. So if you step up and lead or co-lead, you'll be discipled by B, but I'll no longer disciple people directly, only disciple makers." And that
Hmm.
was a categorical shift for me, and one that I punished myself for, and I was punished for by people that did not understand. Like, "You're not even a real pastor anymore." Like, it was all
Hmm.
it was a
We
tough
pay you
it
to
was a
do the work,
tough season
Brian.
of transition. Was that?
We pay you to do the work, Brian. We don't want you to train us to do the work. Like,
Yeah.
that's not the deal.
And that was my intro into becoming countercultural. And I thought I was being more pure to culture and anticipated more of a positive response. Now, there was a lot of people that gave a positive response. And if we continue down the story to the 750 plus people who gave significant sacrifice and transformation, we'll see that it ended up validating itself and Jesus validating. But whew, that's a big shift. That 4 months was tough.
Wow. Yeah, let's maybe linger on that for a second. So it sounds like part of what you decided is I'm no longer gonna continue to make seedless grapes. Like it has to multiply. The seed's got to be in the fruit.
That's
I'm
awesome.
I'm gonna look and examine before I get involved whether or not there's a seed in this fruit, and if there's not, I'm out. Like that's not participating in the Great Commission. You've got to be a disciple maker. So you said that was incredibly costly move and an incredibly
Mhm.
I think unusual move, and I have found that is very true. Yeah, let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about that because I think that part of what you've articulated, and I was kind of poking fun at there is I think one of the reasons that we have to be honest about in our context is that we are so wealthy as a church that we can pay for ministry professionally instead of getting involved in ministry. And so it's really important to imagine what if all of those resources went into multiplication movements. The speed and the power of the movement, what would happen would be so immense. And so part of what I'm constantly trying to figure out is how to help people pull back from ministry models that are by design um, addition models or professional to consumer models. Like, we need to stop this. Like, Jesus came to found a disciple making movement. And that means that the design of the actual ministry itself must be multiplication. And that's very easy to figure out. It takes me about 30 seconds of investigating a ministry model to discover whether or not it's a multiplication movement, whether or not there's a seed in the fruit, or if it's a seedless grape. And
Yeah.
and so we just need to do that work, or we just need to make an agreement to do that. So yeah, talk me through those 4 months a little bit more. Like, how did that conviction play out for you?
Well, I mean, I had a job to do, which was the job I was paid to do,
Yeah.
and that was to continue to build small groups and develop leaders and things like that. So I continued to do that, and I continued to do this little obedience test experiment. And so it was essentially additional work for me. because it was outside the scope of my job description. Now, take some time to think about that one
Right.
for a minute, and it goes back to your podcast. It's like, why is
Yes.
that the case? And I've got
Yeah.
stories of people that we've coached, churches that we've coached where, you know, people get punitive stuff from their supervisors because they're spending too much time making disciples. Like, it's the atrocity is really significant, which just demonstrates that there's such an entrenched cultural paradigm that is seen as the Jesus way, that until you take a metaphorical red pill, to quote, the Matrix, you just can't see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I hadn't seen it yet, to be honest, Jeremy. I mean, I all I saw was the vacancy, the cavity, the facade of what I was doing, and the decay underneath it. Like, the fruit wasn't there that should be there, and I saw that all along, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was in the entrenched camp, and so the big thing that happened was I, these were by definition seeded grapes, the way God made them, by the way. You have to work to make a fruit, not, make it seedless. But essentially, the way God asked me to do it, not the way I decided to do it, I decided to obey. He said, only disciple those that'll step up and lead. Now,
Yes.
that's in stark contrast to the people who I said, would invite, come and I'll disciple you for a year and then you lead, because I've
Right.
seen what happens at the end of that. You do another year, then
Yes.
another year, and then it
Thank you
fades
very
out.
much for
So
that year. I appreciate it. I'll move on to the next Bible study. Thank you.
yes, and that is by far the default percentage of
That's
what
right.
happens with that. So I knew better than that,
Yeah.
and so I went ahead and said, "Step up and lead." What blew my mind was how eager people were
Mm,
for this type of investment into their lives,
mm,
to be truly discipled. None of them knew what the plan was. I didn't know what the plan was yet.
mm,
I just knew it involved 12 months of weekly times together. They were going to focus on spiritual disciplines that both helped them develop the fruit of the spirit and some sense of on the job training to develop their calling as a small group leader.
mm,
Um, what happened was everybody stepped up for this. I mean, we met at 5 o'clock in the morning.
mm.
We read through the whole Bible in a year. We got vulnerable in triads with I believe and I will statements. Actually, we used the SOAP journaling process back then before some of the other disciples made language was curated. Um, I mean, these guys did it and their lives just unbelievable. Like, they owned the Great Commission. I got the one secret ingredient I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it was all because of the definition of disciple making we put forward in all these habits and focused intentionality. And it was so significant. I had to just put them up in front of the leadership team at the church. And that happened one summer evening at one of our Lead 360 events. I just put 11 guys up on the platform and invited them to share their story. Next thing you know, we had 40 people signed up for the next one that wasn't even scheduled yet.
Mm,
There was a hunger that was tapped for spiritual formation. And then, and the further that went, the better we became at just making sure that these were transferable, multi-generation, suited experiences so that the DNA wouldn't get lost between second and third and fourth generations. We didn't exactly succeed at first, but we over the course of 15 years, of course, that stuff's been pretty tightened up.
excellent. And what generation are you guys reaching at this point? As you tracked that?
Well, I'm no longer in that church. I left that church back in 2018 to do this full time. I was at 5 generations on 2 strands, 4 generations on 3 or 4 strands, and I've got a picture of it,
Yes.
multiple others.
Excellent.
But now I'm helping church leaders around the country go to 3 and 4
Okay.
generations on multiple strands and beyond.
This is the key, and this is one of the things I think I mentioned in that podcast was it's very easy to discover whether or not this is the goal. You just have to track it. You have to track the generations,
Yeah.
and what I've been obsessively looking for are movements that are designed to get to the fourth generation. Once you have a movement like that, what happens is there's something inside the blueprint you're using itself that has demonstrated its ability to put a seed in the fruit. Until you get
Yeah.
to the fourth generation, you really don't know. You don't know if there's a systemic problem in the blueprint itself. And so it's really important to be very hard and hammer on that blueprint, because what's likely happening is you're still inadvertently elevating consumption over multiplication. And
Yeah.
the only way to know if you're not doing that is to have these disciple making lines, like to actually like map it out the way you guys have done, and then what you're advocating for these churches to do. So, um, talk to me a little bit about that process. What was it that you have discovered helps make 15 years of this, of really and tracking it and seeing what happened between the beginning of this in 2018 when you saw, this movement penetrate to the fifth generation. What were some of the key insights that you guys discovered that helped get to that place?
Yeah, well, it starts with, a commitment to exclusive invitations, not
Okay.
general invitations. Like, Jesus didn't go to the Sermon on the Mount saying, "Hey, by the way, once this is over, we're gonna have a line down front, and if anybody's interested in more of a, deep dive." Yeah, it was, he prayed overnight at least. I bet he prayed a lot longer than that, and then he exclusively invited people into a very focused mission. And it was an engaged mission. I will make you fishers of men. Like, there was a definition on the front end of this invitation. And so, exclusive invitation, I would say it's a very high bar associated with training and equipping that would render them into becoming people worth following. That's a kind of a character. Fruit of the Spirit is how we define uh, Christ-like character. Well, Bible does too. So we
Yeah.
try to follow that as much as I can. But it also is a high bar of engagement. And if you're not engaging from the front end, like, you have to be serving somewhere to get into our initial 6 month deal. You have to be leading something to get into our 9 month leaders made thing,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
you can't equip to that what you're not doing. Like, you
Yes.
have to be thrown into the fire to do it. And so,
Mm.
exclusive invitation, high bar, mission focused. Um, those were the critical elements, and then just
Okay.
real clarity on what is it we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
We called it an information huddle. You don't sign up for the group, you sign up for an information huddle. You actually have to read a prerequisite. I know I'm listing off a lot of things really quickly, and this might sound like, "Well, this guy's just obtuse." No, just trying to be
Yeah.
efficient
It's
with
helpful. Yeah.
communicating these things, but we have found that this really works. If you like, for Followers Made is our 6 month thing. You want to be considered for this, go and read a book called Not a Fan by Kyle Ottoman. It's a great book, helping people move from fan to follower by highlighting the way Jesus invited, which is a take up your cross and follow me type of invitation. Not, hey, I'll put, I'll put cream in your coffee and watch your kid while you get discipled. There's an element of sacrifice
Well, you're
involved in
hinting,
all of that.
yeah, you're hinting there about what I'd like to drill into, and that is a natural tension between exclusive invitation and the inclusive worship service. And I think this is the collision that a lot of churches cannot figure out. Like, wow, I was blown away. So, for people to understand, the way that the early church did this was when you met somebody and we started to build a relationship with them and they became curious about the faith. Part of what you would then do is invite them into, if they want to give their life to Christ, that you were in a 1 to 3 year disciple making,
Yeah.
relationship with a sponsor who was, and there was multiple scrutinies, and so it went from, like, relationship first to discipleship, and joining the church was at the very tail end of that 1 to 3 year process, after it was demonstrated that your habits have been transformed, that you truly did believe. That's You'd be baptized and invited
And
into
then you're
church.
baptized.
Yeah, yeah, you're baptized in the back end, which I was shocked, 'cause obviously that wasn't what happened in the beginning of Acts, but
Right.
what one of the things that they discovered was that, especially because of the persecution, it was just very difficult to. But one of the things that happened because they reversed the order was they really eliminated the sort of consumer problem that we have today. And so our strategy is the opposite. You're fully a part of the church. You get all the benefits of being a part of the church from day one. Here's cream in your coffee. We'll take care of your kids. And so you
Yeah.
you just constantly are winning people through consumption or through figuring out ways to sort of delight them and
Mm,
surprise them by
yeah.
doing things for them. And what you win people with, you win people to. And so it's a little bit of a bait and switch to all of a sudden, come around later and say, hey, there's this very, really high bar thing called discipleship. Sorry to have to hit you over the head with this thing. I know it seems completely different than everything you've experienced up till now in the church. Like, how have you worked through this? Because I completely agree, but people really, really bristle at the exclusive
Yeah.
invitation because of the way our churches are structured. How have you thought through, or how, as you've worked with pastors who have wrestled through this, how do you think about that piece?
Well, I mean, leadership is the art of picking which problems you want to deal with, right? And so none of these is a problem-free
Right.
solution. I picked up, I've got a little book that we're writing, Breaking the Addiction, which is about how to try to change the culture from purely consumeristic addition to a church that actually leverages these kind of or easy access, inclusive experiences like weekend worship to funnel into discipleship tracks that
Yeah.
render missionaries where they live, work, learn, and play without blowing the church up.
Yeah.
And so like the systemic issue that we talk about here is no church can serve two masters. Addition must serve multiplication, or multiplication will starve
That's right.
under addition.
Yes.
Uh, Say it again. No church can serve two masters. Of course, we're riffing off Jesus' thing on money and God here, but no church can serve two masters. Addition must serve multiplication, or multiplication will starve under addition. There's people that would say you need to choose. I would say that that will be your most if fast, way to choose whatever problems you want, but you're probably going to deal with a lot of your current constituency signing out because, like as you said, what they signed on for, you have to do that to keep them.
That's right.
And so I talk about what we did at Westside that was really formalized well, I think, by Will Mancini, is the funnel fusion idea. We had a version of that was going. I basically saw people in worship in or in our engagement in our assimilation process in three tiers. They're either coming to worship, or they've taken another step and joining a group, or if they've taken another step and they've started to volunteer. And the further people would go into that assimilation track, a lot of churches, by the way, and you know this, call that discipleship.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right. No.
It's assimilation. It's not bad. I don't
Right.
put a zero sticker on there. I put it's got to serve a greater
Right.
purpose, and I'm all in. The further they move down that demonstrated initiative track, the more I wanted as a disciple maker to invest in those people in upper level disciple making investment in order to help them optimize character and calling, help them become fully alive in Christ, John 10:10. And I found that did a couple of things. One, it created a huge demand in our areas of volunteer service
Hmm.
because people recognize if I volunteer there, I have a chance of getting discipled.
Hmm. Oh,
Even
that's
if I
good.
don't really
You
care
tie
for
those
that, I'll
together, uh, and so if people are like all the hungry people that are really looking for transformation, they get involved in service, and then the discipleship
yeah.
is a part of that package.
There bec it was interesting. A demand for these experiences grew beyond our capacity to provide leaders to provide it.
Hmm.
And, it's unusual, and probably hearing that, you're like, "Whatever, dude, you're fantasizing about what was yesterday." It's true. We had a list. And it was evidenced when the other executive pastors came to me and said, "You can't keep this underground anymore. You at least have to put something on the website so we can stop answering all your questions." And we basically put on there, read this book, not a fan. Followers Made Again is the kind of the entry point. Read this book, not a fan. Start volunteering somewhere and let us know when you're done and where you're serving. And we'll put you on a list of people that our new leaders can pray over and consider inviting. And we had a nice list of people. And so the demand, I think, is there inherently in people. They're
Yeah.
just waiting for a plan for this to happen.
Yeah. How do you deal with the pushback of just sheer capacity? So, when I think about the model you just described, it sounds like, and you can correct any of these assumptions, they're going to a worship service probably on a weekly basis. They're part of a small group, they're potentially leading a small group. They're serving in a ministry, and they are participating in a disciple making process. So that would be 4 weekly rhythms. Talk me through, do you feel like, look, just that's just the bar, like get over it, like let's do the stuff that Jesus calls us to do. How do you respond to kind of, so many church leaders, they're like, hey, my average person in this church is, basically attending 2 or 3 times a month. And now we're
Yeah.
talking about potentially 4 rhythms a week.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a couple of boundaries there that need to be, that we need to help people keep as leaders. So, like, don't burn yourself out. Don't burn your family out. There's a number of things that we need to be really, really sensitive to. But then, like, what's the right number of things? I think it's a mistake for us as the leaders to accept the burden for them making that decision. I shouldn't tell you you can do this, this, or this, but you can't do this because everybody's circumstance is different. I need to guide them into a process where they're making solid, God led, spirit affirmed decisions regarding that. Um, but then it comes back down to what is the most helpful thing for them at this moment? If they can only afford two things, what are the things that are going to help them live most fully alive, serve their families, and be an agent of transformation where they live, work, learn, and play?
Yeah.
And to force that, and if a leader says, I don't want to bring these high level exclusive type of discipleship things, whether they're ours or replicates or any, doesn't matter whose, um, because I don't want my people to have that many choices and ruin their lives and not do other things. You got to ask yourself, what business am I in? At some point, if it's getting the job done, great. If it's not getting the job done and you're not willing to answer those questions, then that should be an invitation to consider what business you're in. And that's hard. Those are hard things to say. Um, but the follow-up to that is, let's assume, okay, we're gonna make these available, and we want people to make good decisions about what they prioritize. Here's the God honest truth. People value what they value.
Mm.
If they value kids' sports over Sunday morning, they're gonna do the kids' sports. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't guilt them into a different way. I can't, but I can invite them to experience something that's extremely valuable to me, or I can share the story of how this thing has been extremely valuable to others. More importantly, they can share how valuable it's been, and then they can decide whether or not they want to invest that time. And if God's got it and God's in control of all that, and I'm making myself available to provide that type of experience as a part of my role as a follower of Jesus, then the chips will just fall where they need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the capacity question is really difficult. I like what you said about, look, people have to make those decisions. I think one of the things that we can do as leaders is we can create an expectation of what the rankings should be. Like part of what I'm like, when you put discipleship as number 4, number 5, and basically say, if you got once you got into 3, 4, 5 rhythms, and then that's only when you should prioritize discipleship. That does seem backwards to me. Like it's got to be much higher on the priority list. And I'm now running into pastors who are saying it's number 1 or number 2. That's a very new idea that I'm running into, and it's so encouraging to me when I hear a pastor say that, because I have tons of hope that a move, because you can't have a movement when 5% of the church has the capacity to participate in it. Like 95% of, like, if you understand how movements work, movements have to penetrate the majority of anything for it to continue to multiply. So if you create a model that assumes that 95% of people are going to opt out, it's not going to be a movement. It's going to be a side ministry at the very best. And
Yep.
again, we designed it that way. Like we can see and predict that's the extent of the impact this is going to have. So we have to deal with this problem. So I would love to get one layer deeper, Brian, in the transformation side of the equation. I talked about I always like to see disciple making blueprints properly balance transformation and multiplication. And so you guys have really leaned into solving the multiplication problem. When somebody is participating in discipleship, what are some things that you've learned really help change their heart, their life? And you've used the word kind of apprenticeship, which I really, I think it's got to be an apprenticeship at some level. But we live in a day and age where that's not how people are educated. People go to college, they sit in lecture halls, they watch videos, they read books. This can be really hard on any model that is any kind of life on life transfer of DNA. So, what
Mhm.
have you discovered works for that?
I'm gonna give you some jargon here, and then I'll
Right.
interpret it a little bit, but we call it, limited duration experiences, not perpetual, forever small groups or whatnot. Um, we're gonna just like this is where the education system actually helps us. You're only in first grade for so long, and you either pass the test or you're not, and then you move to second grade and so forth. So limited duration with a particular set of expectations
Okay.
of what outcomes are, and that would be the second thing. It's outcome focused,
Okay.
and we talk about measurable transformation. We actually have what we call the My Impact equation,
Mm.
and it's a very simple, self-giving test. It's not like scientifically validated and all that other stuff, but it's practically validated because I can have biblical definitions of the fruit of the spirit and I can act like my spouse is watching me as I do this and I can take it every 6 months and I can see where my lowest scores are and I can attend to those with the spirit's leadership and I can reassess and measure growth and I can ask for people's help in developing the things that are broken. So the My Impact equation does have the 9 fruit of the spirit on the character side of formation. So
Okay.
you're rating yourself 1 to 10 on those 9 fruit. And then those are averaged out and then, that's your character score. Then we have 8 elements of personal calling that have everything to do with my Ephesians 2:10 masterpiece mission
Mm.
and which is we call our special calling or personal calling. And then there's I participate in intentional relationship evangelism practices. We like to use the bless rhythms. And I'm seeing people that are far from God move from spiritual indifference to curiosity and curiosity to pursuit and pursuit to surrender to Christ. Like I can actually rate those on a scale of 1 to 10 as well. And on average, what's interesting is that most people, when they start with us, they have a 5 or less out of 10 on character. It's their average fruit of the spirit scores. And it's a less than 2 on calling.
Wow.
And so 5 times 2 is 10 out of 100 potential impact score.
Mm.
And so once that dashboard gets just emblazoned into your mind, you see the potential for growth. Oh, I can start to learn more about my gifts and I can start to
Mm.
discover what's the passion area that God wants me to use those gifts in. And how do I start developing the bless rhythms? And you just rudimentally, this change doesn't happen overnight, but some change can,
Yeah.
right? It's all about intentionality and focus on those particular outcomes of character and calling. You can't really determine whether or not you're being formed until you know what the definition of that formation
Yeah.
looks like.
Okay.
And so limited duration, outcome focused, habit fueled. What are the spiritual disciplines? What are the habits? We have a rudimentary list of things that are in each of our experiences that we make available. And that list builds over time that through the course of 3 or 4 years, now you've got a good solid set of spiritual disciplines that are embedded into your rhythms. They're not just practices, they're not just habits, they're actually rhythms
Mm.
that shape how you live. So I would say those are the key elements. It's all mission fixated. I mean, we got more language, but
Yeah.
I've said a lot, so
That's great.
slow
That's what
down.
I'm looking for. Yeah. Because I do think for a lot of folks, there needs to be hope that if I pour my life into this ministry, even if I know it multiplies and if it doesn't, I don't really believe it's going to transform people's lives, then it's difficult to sustain the effort. But once you start to see that, and I love that you have a kind of a dashboard to help visualize, look, you are making an impact. Like this is huge. They were at 10 out of 100 and now they're up to a 30 and they're growing. And as they're
Yeah,
discipling others, that they're going to grow even more. And so you can see like that loop is likely to happen.
yeah.
So I love that. Okay. Now take me to kind of last thing I wanted to explore with you is like a church engagement. So many churches, there are a lot of pastors, increasing number of pastors that I believe really do want to solve this problem. They just
Oh, yeah.
like, how do we do this? And so talk me through at Disciples Made, like what have you discovered about that? If a pastor or a church really wants to understand how to create this kind of culture, what have you guys discovered? what it's like to engage a whole church in a transformation on this level.
I'll start with just strategically at a high level how I would recommend, and
Yeah.
then if you want, I'll go into a here's how people usually start to talk to us
Okay. Great.
specifically. But I would say from the very beginning, don't announce that you're starting a new discipleship program.
Okay.
like like Jesus did. I like to say this tongue in cheek. Jesus didn't go to Jerusalem, hang up a banner on across the street from the temple and say, "This ain't your grandma's temple," right? He didn't set that kind of expectation. He didn't necessitate himself into some type of performance expectation. Like you set yourself up for so much failure
Mm,
uh, when there's a heralding before a new DNA is
yeah.
implemented. Jesus used the language, um, a little bit of yeast in the dough. The
Yeah.
kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Mm,
And he gave so many examples and parables of how it starts small and then eventually gets big and takes over. And it's like, well, why would we try to do something different than that? Because it's not fast enough is the answer. And I
right.
get the urgency. I so get the urgency, but the plan will not work. If you want to introduce this type of transformation into your DNA, we recommend a quiet pilot.
Okay.
Don't announce it. Couch it as a pilot. Couch it as your own spiritual pursuit, a journey that you want to go on, and you're inviting people that you've been praying for a couple of weeks into this
Mm,
specialized journey that isn't a new program, it's just a pursuit. So, and then develop. We've got a whole process for discerning who are the people God's already preparing to lead one of these in the future. It's probably 2 out of 10 on average, just based upon gift sets and whatnot. And so how do I know who they are? And how does that start with character and consistency before a measure of competency?
mm,
And so we've got a whole process to help people do that. And then let's say you lead 2 quiet pilots on the front end, and then each of those develops 2 leaders each. Now you've got 6 potential groups with 60 people on the second round. And if that produces even one new leader each time and the current leaders repeat, I mean, you're well on your way to changing the culture. Um, it's kind of from the bottom. It's really from the bottom up, but it's more like top
yeah.
down because you think about it as these are the leaders. They're on top because they help run and influence the organization, but they learn the posture of servant leadership, and through that servant leadership, start to change the culture through their influence. And that happens when you invest in a few over a longer period of time.
I think what fascinates me most about your model from something that's new to me is you have successfully overlapped discipleship and small groups without confusing them as the same thing. Like I think
Well, it costs us too. Yeah.
well
Because there's
that
a big learning curve. Yeah.
that's a really fascinating move because
Yeah.
I think that if you completely sever or separate small groups and discipleship, then one of the problems that creates is I think pastors really struggle because they know that their church survival might not make it if
Right.
our best people are pulled out of the small group ministry
Yeah.
and are doing disciple making. But if we just do small groups, then we're never going to get to any kind of multiplying movement. And
Yeah.
so that's a really interesting insight I have not heard before. And
Well,
I really appreciate that.
I, I wish I could say was smart in thinking it out, but it's basically he told me to do that very particular thing and to invite the 5 leaders and their co-leaders. So I had a little s, little g small group
Mm,
that did this, which is different than small group. And I noticed that I could essentially change the culture of my small group ministry by changing the leaders.
yeah.
If I wanted them to change how they actually led in their group, they had to experience something more valuable in a different group and take it back.
Mm,
And so that's how that model actually was shaped,
wow.
and it
That's
worked.
fascinating. I want to understand more about that. That's a really, really profound insight. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Well, this has been awesome, Brian. Thank you so much for unpacking that. How can people find you guys, church leaders, if they're interested in diving in with you guys? What does that look like?
Yeah, go to disciplesmade.com. The
Okay.
very top of the page is an invitation to take an assessment. We call it your disciple multiplication capacity
Okay.
assessment. Takes you 2 or 3 minutes to fill it out, and then it'll give you next steps to go in. You can get a free copy of the book, the e-version of the book, and kind of give you a layout of the whole plan. You can investigate elements in our app that start to unpack all this stuff. There's tons of free resources in there as well.
Okay.
And if it makes sense to you, just say, I want a free 30-minute discovery call. That's when we get on the call with you and just basically ask, what are your pain points? What are you trying to solve? And if you're wanting, just bigger and more small groups, we'll let you know, we've got some great people we can recommend you to, but that's not our business. But if you're
Yeah.
saying, I want to change the culture from consumerism to disciple multiplication, we can lay out some plans for you based upon your results and some next steps to further pursue whether or not we're a good fit.
Amazing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for jumping on here with me today. Appreciate it.
Well, friends, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about 1,000 Houses or discover what a season of coaching might look like for you and your household, visit 1kh.org. We'll see you for the next episode.